Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Kaffeepause. This is our weekly check-in with a Berlin-based journalist to talk about the stories shaping the headlines. Today, we are joined by Young Leader alumna Sonja Gillert. She is the head of audio for Die Welt. Hallo Sonja, herzlich willkommen, and it is wonderful to see you.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me.
So as always, there is a lot to talk about, but I think the main headlines today are around Germany's new defense minister, Boris Pistorius, and the debate about the delivery of German-made Leopard battle tanks to Ukraine. Of course, there are a number of other issues and topics, but why don't we start with that? Sonja, can you tell us a little bit about Boris Pistorius? His name sort of came out of nowhere for many observers and was a bit of a surprise when he was named German defense minister. And it would be great to have some background on him and hear how his first 3 or 4 days have been since he took on this post.
Yeah, actually, it was not only a surprise for you. And yeah, as you said, many observers were surprised to read his name. There were other names debated, like the Minister for Labor, Hubertus. And also, I think was urgently looking for a female candidate because he promised to have gender equality in his cabinet. And after Christine Lambrecht stepped down, yeah, he would had to look for a female minister. But yeah, there's Boris Pistorius. He's now the former Minister for Interior from Lower Saxony. I think he served like nearly as the Minister for Interior in Lower Saxony. He was the mayor of the city of Osnabrück before. And yeah, now he stepped up on the federal, serving on a state level for so long. He is in the area, in the field of foreign policy, of international global affairs. That's the comments on his chances to fill in successfully. You read there are certain things he has to keep in mind to do so, and open to learn a lot. He needs a good team of advisors because yeah, we probably talk about that later. The challenges he's somehow in charge of fulfilling the idea of Zeitenwende, the turning point for Germany. He has to modernize and reform our armed forces. He started in his office without a long period of time to, yeah, the first day in office, he already met Lloyd Austin, the American defense minister who was in Germany. Next day, he was part of the meeting of the Ukraine group. So yeah, there's not lots of time for him to learn about his new position. One other interesting aspect is, and one important aspect when you start in the office as defense minister, is that it's a huge ministry. You have around 200,000 people. And compared to that the whole administration of Lower Saxony has less members than the defense ministry. So I think it's an interesting figure to see how different and how huge his new job is. Yeah,
it's certainly a big change for him. I think it came as a big surprise to a lot of people because he does not have in foreign policy. He's not well known on the national stage, let alone the international stage. A lot of questions around him and around how he might in this new position. But it also seems as if this is a great opportunity. The ideas behind the Zeitenwende into action. And I think that that's one of the expectations that a lot of people have, is that he might be more successful than his predecessor was in terms of moving Germany meeting some of the goals of the Zeitenwende. One of the things that I heard over the weekend was some journalists commenting that it was very positive that even to prepare for Defense Lloyd Austin and the meeting of the Ukraine contact group, he was busy trying to sort of come up to speed on vocabulary in English and German terms. What are sort of the first impressions that people have taken away from his role in this office, especially given some of the difficult meetings today with Secretary Austin and with the contact group? And then, after that, we'll sort of really came into play. But what were sort of the trying to balance sort of coming into this position new, recognizing what Germany needs to do moving forward, seeing this mounting pressure on Germany, and yet having to remain loyal to the Chancellor?
I think one big challenge when you become the defense minister, which is somehow seen as a hot seat is in English as well, is that you also have to convince the troops that you stand behind them. It's very important, and I think that was something that Christine Lambrecht failed to do. The troops weren't convinced that she's on their side, that she's speaking up for them. And Boris Pistorius, he was pretty clear that he wants to change things in their favor. I think that's very important from them. And at the same time, he made very clear statements also before he came in the office. There's not a lot that he said on foreign, but he said Ukraine has to win the war, and that outspoken, or that was more outspoken than what we heard from Scholz in the beginning. So that's something in his favor. Also, when it comes to the meeting with the Ukrainian contact group. Yesterday, he gave an interview at the Anne Will, a journalist from the public broadcasting in Germany, and he was very clear and calm in his reactions to her questions, I think. One thing that came up was that after the meeting in Ramstein, he mentioned that to investigate and at how many Leopard 2 tanks are available in Germany, and the magazine came up that with the reporting that there was already a list which says how many tanks and where they are and so on. But when he was questioned about that, he was very clear, and he was able to explain, no, we have to look deeper in this issue. We need to know readiness. We need to know more about how much time it costs to prepare them, to make them ready to be used. And I think that was perceived positively. One last comment on that. Of course, he also depends on what Chancellor Scholz is doing, because, as he said, the last decision about the whole question, if we deliver battle tanks to Ukraine, or if Germany allows Poland and other countries to export battle tanks or transfer battle tanks to the Chancellor and not up to Boris Pistorius.
So one of the other elements of the Zeitenwende is, of course, the 100 billion euro in investment in the Bundeswehr. And one of our viewers is curious what Pistorius knows about procurement, because obviously this is an important element. Modernize the German military. I watched one of the talk shows as well, and they were talking a little bit about the fact that the Bundeswehr shrank from 500,000 to 180,000, and of course, right now nobody growing the size of the Bundeswehr, but really modernizing it. And in order to do that, procurement is essential. Do you have any sense of what Pistorius knows about procurement?
Yeah, I think you're mentioning a big challenge when it comes to spending the 100 billion euros special budget for the Zeitenwende. As in times of war, it's very hard to in a short amount of time invest all that money. And we heard in the last week, for example, Rheinmetall, the head of Rheinmetall, the arms manufacturer, mentioning that it might take up to a year, for example, to repair the battle tanks. So it always takes a lot of time for defense to deliver certain arms, weaponry, ammunition, and so on. So it's a question is if he's prepared for that. On the other hand, I hope he will have advisors who can help him with that. I think the most important now is to urgently start, because time is running out, as we hear from many observers. And interesting is that Olaf Scholz, when he opened, I think the third LNG terminal for Germany, he mentioned a neues Deutschland-Tempo, a new pace for Germany when it comes to LNG terminals. But I think this new pace for Germany is needed when it comes to modernizing the military as well. Yeah, that's a challenge. Absolutely.
It's a big challenge, and we will have to see how it plays out. I think it comes back to what I was saying before, that Pistorius, as the new guy on the job, faces huge challenges, but there could also be some opportunities for him if he's able to make some progress in some of these areas. But let's, sorry.
It just came to my mind as I compared the administration of Lower Saxony to the foreign ministry. Of course, such huge administration. He was in charge of the police forces in Lower Saxony, but that's nothing compared to size. It's a security issue, and he was working in the different from defense. So yeah.
So back to the battle tank issue for just a couple of minutes at least. I think there had been some hope that at Davos, that Germany would change its position on battle tanks. Then, of course, at Friday's meeting of the Ukraine Contact Group, there was hope that there would be a German decision to release the Leopard tanks, whether it be currently has or whether there are in use elsewhere. And this has basically renewed the debate over the battle tanks. It's increased the pressure on Germany and really led to some new tensions between Germany and Poland, where the Polish government has said that it might, export some of these German-made tanks to Ukraine, regardless it says and does. Can you talk a little bit about why Poland could not just export these tanks to Ukraine because they were manufactured in Germany?
In Germany, there are laws that prevent countries who bought German military weaponry, defense allowance of the German government to do so. And these are very strict rules. So yeah, that's why currently, or at least today, there's this debate about whether Poland already is working on a request to Germany to allow them to export those tanks. And so far, there was no official request. On the political debate is once on the political side, it's that the country is allowed to export German weaponry, then it's only a question of a signature. Then it's very quick. So we don't request weeks in advance, or the German government doesn't advance until it can decide. Yeah, that's.
And I think what's also interesting in this is last night in Paris, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock gave an interview, and she sort of took a somewhat different stance from what we had been hearing from the Chancellor. Berlin would not stand in the way of Warsaw sending its own Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine if asked. And so some of the this morning have been that Warsaw is in fact working on a formal request to the Federal Republic to provide some of its tanks to Ukraine. What does this sort of say to you in terms of the different position of the Foreign Office and the Chancellery on issue?
Yeah, it's interesting because the Green Party, or at least the most prominent figures, are supporting battle tank deliveries to Ukraine. I just heard a few minutes ago my colleague Robin Alexander commenting on Annalena Baerbock's interview yesterday, where she was very outspoken. And he said maybe she didn't expect the French journalists to ask hard and that concrete, because today, after the meeting of the European foreign ministers, or in the ministers, she didn't repeat the statement. So maybe he's right with his interpretation.
So one other I have to ask you is, it's this growing number of countries that are trying to apply some pressure on Germany. If you just look at Europe, countries that have these tanks or similar tanks that are looking to Germany to show leadership include the Baltic states, Poland, as we've talked about, Denmark, Holland, Slovakia, and even Great Britain, who have all committed to providing support to Ukraine, including battle tanks. And yet the Chancellor's spokesperson, Stefan Hebestreit, said that Berlin is not alone, and that at the meeting of the conference, there were a number of countries that were also a little bit more reluctant, a little bit more reserved. I guess the question that I have is who else is, because it seems to me that there are a lot more countries that are looking for German leadership, for German support in this than those that are standing.
Yeah, actually, true. There's a growing pressure also within the coalition of the Social Democrats, the Green Party, and the Liberals. There's a lot of debate and and arguments about whether or not Germany should deliver those battle tanks. Yesterday at the meeting, when Olaf Scholz met him in Paris for the celebrations of 60 years of Élysée Treaty, there was also were questions from France, and it felt to me that the Leclerc battle tank about that was much less loud compared to the debate in Germany. Of course, it's the German debate is connected to all those other European countries. I think that was an interesting aspect of the whole debate. And the question, other European countries asking for German leadership. Also, the German government to have a more responsible role on the international level and not being so dependent on. One could raise the question: does leadership mean to say yes, or is it leadership to take the time to make? Of course, from a Ukrainian standpoint, I would say no. can't take much more time because they are losing territory, people are dying. So for them, the pressure is there, but it can be also argued it is a sign of leadership to take your time for a decision you're not sure about yet. So just other side of the debate.
And that's certainly something that I was hearing this morning in press reports and over the weekend, that sort of this is process and that it makes sense for the chancellor to take. I guess the mounting frustration, the mounting pressure that we're seeing from others is we are almost hitting the 1-year anniversary of this phase of the war in Ukraine, of Russia's invasion last February. And so there's a sense of, there's not a lot of time. And as Vladimir Zelensky has said, time right now is on Russia's side, and he's very concerned that Ukraine needs to turn this around because time is working against them.
And especially when we see to come up with enough battle tanks, also an interesting aspect, because I saw the statement by Carlo Marsala from the Bundeswehr University. Tanks would actually be needed to break through the front. But 300 were a better number. So while we are discussing, it would be good to figure out how many tanks would come from. So Germany said, or not Germany said, but there were reports that around 19 tanks are only used for training purposes that could be sent if the government decides so. I think Poland said they have 18 tanks. So it's interesting to could come from.
And look at the number of tanks, in fact, as well. Sonja, especially since you just mentioned the fact that the anniversary of the Élysée Treaty, and Chancellor Olaf Scholz made his first foreign trip of the year to Paris to meet with Emmanuel Macron. Tried, it seemed, at the joint press conference to sort of paper over Franco-German relationship, and Scholz seemed that Europe can resolve some of the trade issues that it has with the Inflation Reduction Act, and both France and Germany sort of called for working together to bring about some changes to the EU treaty that governs the European Union. What were your takeaways from this meeting between Macron and Scholz?
Yeah, I think the relationship was in a better state than last October, when the meeting was planned to take place, the annual meeting, and because of the tensed relation between France and Germany, they they rearranged the meeting to January. I think Olaf Scholz described it very poetic when he said the relation between Paris and Berlin, both countries work. The engine, the so-called, very often called engine, is a compromise machine, which sometimes makes loud sounds and has its issues, but it's taken care of. So very well. And I think in the light of the current war, it's very clear how much needed the German-French couple is needed in the European Union. And so also with their joint statement, the crisis in Ukraine and the defense and security situation was on top. So it was the most urgent. And of course, as you said, also when it comes to the trade policy towards the United States, they have a field where it's important for them to work together. I think it was like a refreshing moment for the German-French relationship. Yes.
And certainly an important one after the tensions of the last year, to sort of see that positive vibe, and that this is has the potential for an important restart. Sort of tying together the meeting between Scholz and Macron and what we were talking about before related to the war in Ukraine. One of our viewers points out that Scholz and Macron showed steadfast support for Ukraine, and said that their positions were, quote, perfectly coordinated with partners, end quote. But that there seems to be some concern, particularly in the chancellery, that an escalation in the war could pull European countries more directly into the conflict. And that, certainly has been one of the excuses, if you will, that has been given for not providing tanks, for not getting more involved, is that there could be a red line in Moscow if Paris and Berlin and other countries provide heavy weapons. Would you agree that this kind of escalation is likely, and that other European countries could be dragged into the conflict?
I'm not a defense or military expert, but I think it's worth mentioning that there's skepticism in the population and worry in the population that because Ukraine is not far, and we've seen, of course, Germany stands behind Ukraine, but I think Germans have also seen like how real the conflict is. It's not something on TV. It's like people from Ukraine coming to Germany, trying to be safe, like running, like, and that's I think something that worries the population here. And even when you hear Jens Stoltenberg, the General Secretary of NATO, stated that we don't know how Putin would react. So I think that's an issue that when you take the decision, if you deliver battle tanks, you have to keep in mind, especially when you're in Europe. And so I don't know. I think the idea that if it would deliver Abram tanks, which is also discussed now, and then it's more unified and tight, and a more unified decision somehow doesn't make it more secure or less secure, because if there's a situation, it won't make a huge difference if the US delivered battle tanks, I think. But of course, for the how to say that, like,
well, the symbolism is
for the
important.
symbolism, it's important. So that's what I want.
And I think it comes back to the Olaf Scholz saying that there wouldn't be any German Alleingänge, right? That Germany would not take positions on its own, but that it would work with its allies. And there's been some discussion about whether or not the US providing a couple of tanks could sort of release Germany to be able to provide more tanks, or at least sign off on other countries as well.
And I think
obviously,
it just came to my mind when we hear the threats, I think yesterday or today, by the Russian head of the Russian parliament, threatening that Russia will use more powerful weapons, and that it might have a more global, or it might end in a global tragedy, or tragedy on a global scale.
And I think that's been one of the concerns altogether, is that this might escalate to a nuclear conflict, or an even broader conflict. So switching gears a little bit, but obviously sticking with foreign policy. It was very interesting over the weekend. The SPD, the Social Democrats, released a new sort of framework for foreign and security policy. One of the commentaries that I read said something along the lines of it took a year to produce 21 pages of text. But basically this new document is supposed to be a way of giving sort of life to the Zeitenwende, right? If you think back to February of last year when Olaf Scholz spoke before the Bundestag, he announced the Zeitenwende, laid out a new trajectory for German foreign security and energy policy. And while there has been some activity, there has not been as much as some people thought and some people hoped. With this new paper, it seems as if there's a new framework for German foreign and security policy. Can you talk a little bit about this new paper and about the sort of direction it takes?
Yeah, I think you already said it brings the Zeitenwende to life somehow in Olaf Scholz's party. I read the Tagesschau, the news show from the public broadcaster ARD had the paper already yesterday, and I think they counted 10 times Zeitenwende was mentioned in this paper. So that's at its core. The paper highlights the central role in Europe that Germany wants to play or wants to deepen. It also states that Germany wants to take on more responsibilities on the to secure the international order. And I think interesting is that it also includes the commitment to the to fulfill the 2% goal of military spending within NATO. For the Social Democrats, an important issue was the question where it stands towards Russia, because historically the party was known to be more pro-Russian, and there is a more clear, or that now it clarified its position towards Russia in this paper. And if we look in other directions towards China, the paper also makes clear that the approach should be to diversify its dependencies when it comes to certain areas like energy and so on. So
I mean, that was one thing that I thought was interesting was there was even mention of maybe not drawing the right lessons from Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, and using that prism, if you will, to look at relations with China and say, what are the lessons we can draw from the current situation with Russia in our partnership with China, and how do we try to minimize some of the risks and some of the dependencies in that process. So it really is, you know, a forward-looking document that might guide the direction of foreign policy for the party and for Germany.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Yeah.
So as we start to kind of come to a close, I'd like to come back to German domestic politics and maybe talk about two other things depending on how our time is. One is, you know, we had talked a little bit about the fact that there had been gender parity in the cabinet, and this was something that was very important in Scholz's government for the traffic light coalition. And with Boris Pistorius coming in and replacing Christiane Lambrecht, parity is not there anymore. Are there any other likely shakeups in the cabinet that you see in the months ahead?
Yeah, I think another new challenge when it comes to gender parity will be probably the Ministry of Interior by Nancy Faeser. It's just rumors yet, but it will clarify. It will be clarified in February, I think February 3rd. There will be a decision about the question whether or not Nancy Faeser, a Social Democrat, will be the front runner for her party in the state elections of Hessen in October. The minister in Hessen, the conservative minister, Volker Bouffier, stepped down, and now there is a not so well-known how to say, like successor, is not so
Yeah.
well known.
Yep.
Successor will be running for office again in the election. And so after many years of conservative leadership in Hessen, there will be an opportunity for the Social Democrats to probably lead Hessen, or at least have a good chance to be back in the game. And that's why it's discussed if Nancy Faeser would be a good fit for frontrunner. Yeah, and then there will be the question, who will be the next Minister of Interior? Boris Pistorius would have been a likely solution for this problem, and now Olaf Scholz needs to find another candidate for this office.
Undoubtedly, he's thinking a lot about what some other changes could be, and it remains to be seen sort of how those changes unfold, how they take place.
Yeah, and it's very unfortunate for Christine Lambrecht, actually, because it was said that she wanted to be Minister of Interior, and maybe that would have been a better fit for her, actually. But yeah, now it's too late. I don't expect her to come back in this office.
That does not seem likely. The other thing, and maybe this is sort of digging a little bit too deep into German domestic politics, but there has been a call for some election reform. The German parliament currently has over 730 seats. This is over 130 more seats than it should have. And so late last week, the governing coalition presented a reform of the electoral law that's intended to restore the size of the parliament to 598 seats.
Yeah.
This draft was circulated last week and will be up for debate in the Bundestag on Friday, I believe. Of course, there's been criticism from the opposition party about this, but can you, in layman's terms, talk to us a little bit about sort of this discussion about the size of the Bundestag, the size of the parliament, what it means, and what this law might mean?
Yeah, I don't want to bore you with the details of this crazy reform, because German electoral law with 2 votes that every German has is very complicated, and we have something called overhang mandates and leveling mandates, and all in all, the rise of smaller parties added up to having more and more mandates in our parliament. So I just read that the German parliament currently is larger than any other democratically elected parliament, which is very interesting and very expensive. And that's also one reason why the traffic light coalition has somehow tried to downsize it. The former government already tried that and failed to do so. And yeah, it's tough. And like you said, the opposition already criticized the bill that the traffic light coalition presented. One reason, especially with the criticism from the Bavarian party CSU, is that they would lose direct candidates. For them, it's an important aspect. Proportionally, they would have the same size, but they would lose direct candidates. That's that would be of course something not in their favor. So yeah,
so this is a story to watch, because it could have a major impact on the makeup of the Bundestag moving. As we come to a close, are there any other stories that you're watching, or things that you would recommend our viewers to pay attention to?
I think actually this week, until there will be any decision about the battle tanks and debate around it, will be kind of the most important issue in at least the media coverage, I would say. But no one knows what happens tomorrow. But that's a major debate so far.
Well, Sonja, herzlichen Dank. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful to speak with you as always, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the not too distant future. Obviously, there is a lot going on in Germany right now, and we benefit greatly from insights like yours to help us unpack what's happening there.
Thank you, Steve. Have a good week.